Hello, my name is Dr. Sadat and I am presenting on cardiac cycle. The objective of this video is to discuss cardiac cycle. I'm going to summarize the events which are happening during cardiac cycle, explain the electrical activity which actually leads to mechanical activity. I'll explain how the heart sounds are produced, and finally describe the relationship between blood pressure and blood volume. So the heart does its job by contraction and relaxation, which are called systole and diastole. Between systole and diastole, a series of events are happening. Those events are called cardiac cycle. For example, electrical activity starts first, and that leads to mechanical activity. Also, because of the closure of valves, heart sounds are produced. And also pressure and volume changes between systole and diastole. On the right side, you see a graph representing different activities during cardiac cycle. What I'm going to do is that I'll try to break it down one at a time so we understand the whole cardiac cycle eventually. So first, let's discuss electrical activity of the heart. We need to understand that the heart is made of two types of tissues: contractile tissue, which has the ability to contract and relax, and conductive tissue, which has the ability to generate electrical impulses and initiate action potential. The electrical activity of the heart can actually be recorded. So an electrocardiogram is a recording of the electrical activity of the heart. And by the way, by electrical activity, we mean action potential and depolarization and repolarization. It's also worth mentioning that it is the electrical activity that leads to mechanical activity of the heart, which are contraction and relaxation. So in this slide, you see a graph which represents the different waves of the heart. We see P wave, which represents depolarization of the atria, and this leads to the contraction of the atria. We also see QRS wave. This represents depolarization of ventricle, which correlates with contraction of the ventricles. And then there is T wave, corresponds to ventricle repolarization, which actually leads to ventricular relaxation. Now you're probably thinking, what about atrial repolarization? Well, the fact that atrial repolarization and ventricular depolarization are happening at the same time, so the machine will only record the wave with the highest magnitude. And since a ventricular depolarization wave, which is QRS, is higher, so that's why we only see QRS. Or in another word, the wave which represents atrial repolarization is buried here. It's superimposed by the ventricular depolarization and we cannot see it. Once the electrical activity is generated, it leads to mechanical activity, which are contraction and relaxation. First, the atria contract and then ventricles relax. Then ventricles contract and atria relax. By the way, the term systole means contraction and diastole means relaxation. There are a couple of things to understand during contraction and relaxation of the heart. So first of all, when the heart is contracting, the pressure inside the right and left ventricles build up, and this causes closure of bicuspid valve and tricuspid valve. So these two valves are getting closed. On the other end, pulmonic valve and aortic valve are open during this period. On the left side of the slide, which represents ventricular diastole, the ventricles are relaxed. Here, totally opposite. This time around, tricuspid valve and bicuspid valves are open, while pulmonic valve and aortic valves are closed. As the heart contracts and relaxes, it causes opening of some valves while other valves are getting closed. It's the closure of valves which produce heart sounds. There are two heart sounds, the first heart sound and the second heart sound. The first heart sound is produced during ventricular systole due to closure of bicuspid valve and tricuspid valve. The second heart sound is produced during ventricular diastole due to closure of aortic valve and pulmonic valve. I think what's important to understand is that what causes the first and second heart sound, which are actually the closure of valves, but you need to know which valves, and also when are they happening. So the first heart sound is happening at the beginning of systole, while the second heart sound is happening at the beginning of diastole. This graph represents changes in pressure and volume during cardiac cycle. Let's start with the volume first. So this represents ventricular systole and this represents ventricular diastole. As you can see that the heart spends more time during diastole than systole. Okay, so during systole, the ventricles are contracting and it's pumping blood from the ventricles into large blood vessels. So it's intuitive that the volume inside the heart goes down because the blood is leaving the heart. And during diastole, the ventricles are receiving blood. That's why the volume is going up. Very straightforward concept. Similarly, pressure, it has a slightly indirect relationship with volume. So during systole, the ventricles are contracting. That's why the pressure inside the ventricles go up. It goes up. While during diastole, because the ventricles are relaxing, the pressure goes down and it eventually reaches almost zero. So these are the pressure changes in the ventricles during systole and diastole. I think a general statement here will be that volume and pressure they have a indirect relationship, and it all has to do with contraction and relaxation. During contraction, pressure goes up, volume goes down. During relaxation, pressure goes down, volume goes up. Let's summarize what we discussed. So we said that first of all, electrical activity starts in the heart, and here you see a electrocardiogram graph, PQRS T wave. And then we said it's the electrical activity which leads to the mechanical activity of the heart. And by mechanical activity, we mean contraction or systole and relaxation or diastole. During contraction of ventricles, bicuspid and tricuspid valves are getting closed, so the closure will produce the first heart sound. And during relaxation or diastole, aortic valve and pulmonary valves are getting closed, and that produce the second heart sound. Also, as the heart contracts and relaxes, there will be change in volume and in pressure. So we said if the volume is going down, the pressure is going up. And as the volume is going up, the pressure is going down. So hopefully you learned something from this presentation.